Picture a rich, powerful man in 1890. He runs a bank or a railroad. Now hand him a wristwatch. Watch his face. That look isn't confusion. It's disgust. Because in his world, a watch strapped to your wrist isn't a tool. It's jewelry. It's what his wife wears. A serious man, in his mind, would sooner be caught in a corset. And then the world went to war, and everything that man believed about being a man got buried in the mud. So how does an entire generation of men go from mocking a wristwatch as women's jewelry to putting one on every single soldier, president, and working man for the next 100 years? Stick around. By the end of this, you'll never glance at your own wrist the same way again. Specifically, a small pocket sewn into the waistcoat, with a gold chain looping across the stomach to a buttonhole. That chain even had its own name, Albert, after Queen Victoria's husband. This wasn't just about telling time. It was a performance. A gentleman would reach across his body, draw the watch out with 2 fingers, press the crown, pop the cover, read the dial, and click it shut with our voice services. Every part of that ritual told the room exactly who he was. He owned time. He kept it in gold, against his heart. Fathers passed these watches down to sons. Railroad companies issued them to conductors because a train running on the wrong minute could kill people. The pocket watch sat at the center of what it meant to be a respectable man. So where did that leave the wristwatch? On a woman's arm, and nowhere else. In 1868, the Swiss company, Patek Philippe, made what many historians call the first true wristwatch for a Hungarian countess. It was gold and gemstones, with a tiny watch face almost as an afterthought. That set the pattern for decades. These early wrist-worn pieces were sold in the jewelry sections of department stores, next to bracelets and brooches. They were even called wristlets. The name alone tells you everything. Delicate, dainty, definitely not for men. And men noticed. They sneered. The general attitude of the time was, a man would sooner wear a skirt than strap a watch to his wrist. Military men, businessmen, anyone who wanted to look serious, kept their watch in their pocket, exactly where it belonged. Which makes what happened next genuinely strange. Because the object men mocked as women's jewelry was about to become the most masculine thing a man could own. And the thing that flipped it wasn't fashion. It wasn't a celebrity. It was warfare. Small cracks in this prejudice were already forming before the big war even started, and every single one of them appeared on a battlefield. Around 1880, the German Imperial Navy reportedly ordered thousands of wrist-worn watches for gunnery officers who needed both hands free and a fast way to read the time while coordinating fire. These weren't fashion items. They were tools for men whose job was hitting a target. Then came the Boer War in South Africa. From 1899 to 1902, British officers ran into a simple, brutal problem. You cannot dig a pocket watch out of your waistcoat while holding a revolver and climbing a ridge under fire. So officers improvised. They strapped their pocket watches to their wrists with leather cup holders. Companies started selling purpose-made campaign watches for men in the field. Soldiers were doing, out of pure necessity, exactly what civilians back home would have laughed at. And the wristwatch got one more push from a completely different direction: the sky. In 1904, Brazilian aviator Alberto Santos Dumont couldn't check a pocket watch mid-flight with both hands on the controls, so his friend, the jeweler Louis Cartier, designed him a flat wristwatch he could read without letting go. Suddenly, a wristwatch wasn't a soldier's improvisation or a lady's bracelet. It was the watch of a daring, modern man conquering the air. But the prejudice was only cracking. It was nowhere close to broken. It would take the largest war the world had ever seen to finish the job. In the summer of 1914, Europe marched into the First World War, expecting it to be over by Christmas. Instead, the armies dug in. Picture a soldier in that trench, thick gloves caked in mud, a rifle in his hands, machine gun fire chewing up the air above his head. Now ask that man to check the time the old way. Unbutton a coat, reach into a pocket, pull out a delicate gold watch, flip it open, read it, put it away. In combat, those few seconds with both hands busy could get you killed. But here's the part that made the wristwatch not just convenient, but absolutely essential. By 1916, both sides were using a tactic called the creeping barrage. Before an attack, artillery would fire on the enemy trenches, then slowly walk the explosions forward, lifting fire a set distance every few minutes. Right behind that wall of shells, close enough to feel the heat, the infantry advanced. Think about what that requires. Artillery miles behind the lines, and infantry crawling through the mud, had to be running on the exact same clock, down to the second. Move too fast, you walk into your own shells. Move too slow, the enemy gunners climb back up and cut you down. Officers would gather before an assault and set their watches to the same second. Then, when it was time to climb the ladder into open fire, an officer had one hand gripping the rung, one hand on his pistol, and his eyes locked on the only timepiece that made sense. The one strapped to his wrist. One quick glance, no fumbling. The watch that grown men had mocked as women's jewelry was now the difference between a coordinated attack and a slaughter. The pocket watch was finished, not because of fashion, because of physics and death. Wait, it gets even stranger. Because attacks often went in at night, and a soldier couldn't exactly strike a match to read his watch without inviting a sniper's bullet. So manufacturers coated watch dials in radium paint, a radioactive material that glowed green in the dark. Young women were hired to hand paint those tiny numbers. Nobody understood it at the time, but radium is deeply poisonous, and many of those painters would later pay a horrifying price for the glow that helped soldiers read the time in the dark. On the battlefield, though, that glowing dial was a small miracle. Manufacturers also bolted metal shrapnel guards over the glass and swapped delicate straps for tough leather that could survive mud, freezing water, and weeks without coming off. In the span of one generation, the exact same object went from something sold beside diamond brooches to rugged military equipment built to survive the worst conditions a human being can face. By the early 1920s, the men of the war came home, and they brought their habits with them. A returning officer who had timed assaults by his wrist for 4 years was not about to start fumbling for a pocket watch back home, and the wristwatch now carried a completely new meaning. It wasn't feminine anymore. It was the mark of a veteran, modern, practical, a man of action. The market told the story in cold numbers. Before the war, pocket watches outsold wristwatches by a wide margin. By around 1930, wristwatches were outselling pocket watches by something like 50 to 1. In barely 2 decades, an entire category of object flipped from a male taboo to the default. And here's the twist most people never hear. While soldiers were changing what a watch meant, one small neutral country was quietly figuring out how to make almost all of them. In the Jura Mountains of Switzerland, farming families had spent generations making tiny watch parts by hand through the long, brutal winters when farming stopped. By the 1800s, Switzerland had the deepest concentration of precision watchmaking talent on Earth, and then geography handed them a gift. While the rest of Europe tore itself apart in 2 world wars, Switzerland stayed neutral. Its factories kept running, while everyone else turned to building artillery. So when the world suddenly needed millions of rugged wristwatches, one country was perfectly positioned to supply them. In 1926, a Swiss company called Rolex built a fully sealed watch case and had a young typist swim the English Channel, wearing one for 10 hours to prove it. It never stopped ticking. The transformation that started in the trenches was complete. The wristwatch had become the symbol of male competence and reliability. So next time you glance at your wrist, remember where that habit actually comes from. Not fashion, not a designer's whim. It comes from young men crouched in freezing trenches, watching a green dial glow in the dark, waiting for the exact second to climb a ladder into gunfire. The most masculine object a man could own started its life as a lady's bracelet. It took the bloodiest war in history to change that, and it never changed back. If you want more hidden histories about the everyday objects you've never once questioned, that's exactly what Dustborn is built for. Subscribe Dustborn, and next time you'll never look at your own watch the same way again.